this is what a new moon looks like. And I'm going to read one precept. This is Ecclesiasticus chapter 43, verses 6 and 7. I'll read 8 as well. It says, Ecclesiasticus 43, verse 6, He made the moon also to serve in her season, for a declaration of times and a sign of the world. What does it mean by a declaration of times? Well, it starts with the new moon. Then you have the Sabbaths. Then you have the various high holy days. Let me read that again. He made the moon also to serve in... The moon is to serve who? To serve men. To serve in her season, for a declaration to declare of times. How do you know to keep the Passover? You follow the new moon and you count 14 days, and that evening of that 14th day is the beginning of the Passover, which is the beginning of the unleavened bread. The 14th day at evening is known as the Passover. When you go to the origins of that in the land of Mizraim, the death angel passed over. And you had to have the lamb's blood on your doorpost. Reading on. And a sign of the world. 7th verse. From the moon is the sign of feast. So let's go back to the 16th verse again. Or the 6th verse. He made the moon also to serve in her season, for a declaration of times. What times? These feasts. The various high holy days, the Sabbaths, the various feasts. The Day of Atonement, the Passover, Purim, Hanukkah. Everything is based upon that. You count from the new moon. It says, 7th verse again, is Ecclesiasticus 43 verse 7. From the moon is the sign of feast, a light that decreaseth in her perfection. When do you see the light from the moon? When the moon is full. That's when you see that big light in the sky. That's a lesser light than the sun. 7th verse again. From the moon is the sign of feast, a light. Like when the new moon comes in, you don't see any light, or you might see a slight crescent of light. Basically, on a new moon, when you look up into the sky at night, you see nothing. If you look hard enough, you see a slight crescent. Because when the new moon is there, you don't see anything, and then maybe 5 hours later, 6 hours later, you'll see a light of a crescent. That's the new moon. 7th verse again. From the moon is the sign of feast, a light that decreases in her perfection. When does the moon come into her perfection? When the moon is full, when you see that perfect circle of light in the sky. Let me read that again. From the moon is the sign of feast, a light that decreases in her perfection. What does the word decrease mean? or decreaseth mean? It means that it goes down, it diminishes. It wanes from the time of the full moon, the new moon, which is, you look up into the sky, it's invisible. A couple of days you'll see a crescent, then a week you'll see like exactly half of the new moon in a week. So that's when the moon waxes or increases. When it wanes, it decreases. Let me read the 7th verse again. Remember, we are to defend the gospel. The new moon is not on the full moon. It's when you look up into the sky, you see nothing, and then a couple hours later you'll see a slight light of a thin crescent line, or thin crescent. 7th verse again, Ecclesiasticus 43 verse 7. From the moon is the sign of feast, and that includes Sabbaths. A light that decreases in her perfection. When do you see the light of a moon? When the moon is full. When is her perfection? When the moon is full. Is that the new moon? No. Let me read again. From the moon is the sign of feast, a light that decreases or wanes in her perfection. That light of perfection wanes or decreases when it's full, and it starts to go in the other direction, and the moon, the light starts to disappear. And then in around 2 weeks time, you have a new moon again. 8th verse. Let's see what that says. The month is called after her name, increasing or waxing wonderfully in her changes. What does it mean by increasing wonderfully in her changes? From the new moon, you have the first quarter, which is like the quarter moon. You see that big crescent. And then a week later, you see the moon, half of the moon. You know how you take a chocolate chip cookie and you cut it in half? Well, that's a week in. 2 weeks in, 14, 15 days in, is when the moon is full. So when we had the Passover, if you looked at the 14th day at evening, when you looked up at the sky, the moon was full, which was not a new moon. It said the month is called, 8th verse again, the month is called after her name, increasing wonderfully in her changes. Her changing, being an instrument of the armies above, shining in the firmament of heaven, the beauty of heaven, the glory of the stars, an ornament giving light in the highest places of the Lord. At the commandment of the Holy One, they will stand in their order and never faint in their watches. Because the new moon, you look up into the sky, you see nothing. A couple of hours later, you'll see a light, thin crescent. About 3 days later, you'll see a fuller crescent. About 7 days later, you'll see half of the moon. 14 going into 15 days later, you will see a full moon. And that's the moon in her perfection. Anyway, I think I said enough. It's on to the next one. Shalom.